You remember we were talking about that?
Aliens?
Ancient Apocalypse.
Oh, this is our Joe Rogan
So it's on,
podcast.
yes, the podcast.
We're
See, so Netflix came out with a series a little while back called Ancient Apocalypse.
Yes.
You did watch it, right? A little bit of it?
Yes, a few.
So, brief synopsis. What do you got? I'll fill in any gaps as we go.
From that particular series, I can't pull anything, but I think that guy who's made the series, he believes that the Eye of the Sahara in Africa is the site of Atlantis, I believe. From watching Joe Rogan.
He didn't talk about that on the show.
He didn't?
But they totally might come out with a season 2.
Well, maybe
I don't know. But anyway, we will go into that stuff with Joe Rogan and everything, because he has been on Joe Rogan, and he actually had Joe Rogan on Ancient Alien, or Ancient, you have me calling it Ancient Aliens, Ancient Apocalypse, for like 2 or 3 episodes.
Oh, no, it's not.
So essentially what he is proposing is that there was a advanced, I don't want to say like sci-fi, but like advanced civilization during the Ice Age. So the Ice Age would have been about, I don't know, 10,000 BC.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at something that was about 12,000 years ago. He believes there was almost like an extinction level event that actually might have also correlated with the end of the Ice Age a little bit. So into the last episode, because he's building up, he goes to all these different sites.
Wait, so but they all keep that long ago? 10, 11, 15,000 years ago?
Yeah, it was about like 12,000 years ago.
Okay.
13,000 years ago. But he goes to all these different sites. So he starts in, I'm going to probably say some wrong places. It was like Polynesia or something. He found a site that was from that time period. It was from like 10,000, 11,000 BCE. Then he goes to sites in the Middle East, like Turkey, that predate like Samaria. So we think of Samaria as like the beginning of civilization, the Mesopotamia. So he finds one that's like outside of that, predates that.
What?
He also goes to America though, like in Ohio or somewhere, and he finds like do you know what the mound builders are?
The mountain builders?
The mound builders. The Mississippian culture. So they built, it's the same thing. So in like around the area of the Mississippi, there was a group that were building massive mounds. I'm talking like literally making like human-made little mountains. And Europeans came across them and they were like, oh, aliens must have built it. Or they just thought it was natural or whatever. Anyway, finally archaeologists look into it because they're actually going to build a highway. This wasn't on the show. I just already know this. And they were like, hey, we're gonna build like a highway, like think I-40, I-25, like the big I right through the middle of this site. And they were like, you guys can't do that. Like this is an ancient site. Like it's very archaeologically important. So they like had to shift the like highway system around it or whatever. But now they know there was like this thriving culture that had charted all kinds of stuff astrologically. But then that's what he gets into too. So a lot of the stuff he's finding at all the sites, they're tracking astronomy. And we know that, right? And a lot of ancient stuff. But it's sort of like, but why were they tracking astronomy? It feels pretty easy to be like, well, because the stars look pretty, you can figure out the seasons, whatever. He's hypothesizing space snakes, comets, asteroids, something like that came, because that's what they would have called it in a lot of cultures. Like they almost thought it was like a sky snake. And that's what they see at this site. Okay. They see a massive snake the mound builders built, and it's pointed in the direction that lines itself exactly 12,000 years ago with like the spring equinox or solstice or something like that. Anyways, at the site in Turkey, same thing. They have like astrology that we might recognize, like Scorpio, not Sagittarius, but like a bird that would sort of be in the shape of that like bow. Yeah, they have like a turkey in Turkey. So huge? Sort of, but it also is snake-esque. That's the other interesting thing. It's Golden Tempe. Have you heard of the Nazca lines in Peru? I have. What do you think of those? I didn't get to see when I was in Peru. Did this guy mention anything about that? No, I don't think they're that old. I think the Nazca lines are only a couple thousand years old, a couple hundred. Okay, never mind. I don't actually know. Continue. They're pre-Inca, but I don't know. I don't know if this is part of the Nazca lines, but there's these ditches, I think, close to the Nazca line. Yeah. Do you know about those? I don't. So it looks like every 3 feet for like a mile-long strip, every 3 feet, there's like a 6-foot deep hole. Huh.
So it looks like a giant mining machine just like
Just
rolled over and just like took all these samples or something.
Huh.
But they say it's, I can't remember the years.
That's interesting.
Very old.
I'll have to look into that for the next podcast.
Definitely a Peru area.
In that area. Okay. But anyway, so astrology on this stone face and the sun. What's important about the sun is if you can figure out where the sun is in relation to those signs, you can basically get a date.
Okay.
Again, the date we're finding is about 12,000 BCE. So again, all this shit just keeps pointing. It's like everything was astrologically aligned.
Things keep pointing
to things like the Northern Star, to Sirius, to the sun, to the moon. But if you date it all the way back to when they would have been aligned to that, 12,000 BCE, or right around then.
Tick.
Anyway, so yeah, I don't know, just like a bunch of stuff out there. There was even like this hypothesis that maybe I found like Atlantis or whatever, but I think he was playing on just other people's stuff. Ultimately, though, he hypothesizes that the comet or comets hit all the ice because right at this time, most of the planet was covered in ice sheets, like a mile thick. And what's going to happen when something like a comet hits it? Because that's super hot, super
so
explosive and hot. It's going to hit all that ice, and then you have a
catastrophic
flood. And what do you get from like all of these cultures? All the sites you went to in Mexico have flood myths. Peru, I know, has a flood myth. Gilgamesh from the Middle East, from Babylon and Samaria, flood myth.
Right.
Even Noah. I mean, Egypt has like similar things. Mexico has similar things. Where after all this, you have a flood, and then all of a sudden you have this person, a deity usually, bring culture. There's always this cultural bringer that happens after the devastating flood, after the devastating crisis. Like, we lost civilization, everything got destroyed, slate wiped clean, we're starting over. Deity, smart person comes along and is like, here's astrology and astronomy and math and history and culture.
Society. Yeah.
And being able to teach them. Well, not even taking advantage of, he's theorizing that they were from that advanced civilization. Atlantis, if you want to call it, whatever it was. It could have been multiple different civilizations, I suppose. But after this massive flooding, which, you know, if you're in a local area, you might think the whole damn world just ended. Now, all of a sudden, they're the ones that are like, okay, civilization got almost wiped out. Let's go help everyone everywhere else relearn culture and math and science and astronomy. Why do you want to know astronomy? Because then you can track these sky snakes. So that way you can be like, is there another freaking meteor going to hit us and we're going to get hit by a comet again?
So this was from the show. That was his conclusion?
Yeah.
Comment? Okay.
He does, though. He gets a lot of criticism. He's referred to as a pseudo-archaeologist, but he even says himself, I'm not an archaeologist. I am a journalist, and this is what I'm investigating. So respect on that.
Do you remember any geological evidence?
He actually worked with a geologist at one point. He also was working with like marine biologists. He was working with historians in local areas.
How close would the comet have to come to actually interfere with the temperature here? Pretty fucking close, I would imagine.
What do you mean, like, come close? Like, because it impacted is what he's saying.
Oh,
like it hit.
I thought it was a flyby.
So no, like it hit the ice sheet. And he's theorizing it specifically hit like North America, like in the United States. Because you find like these ripples. So you know like what the ocean does on a beach, where it like goes in and it flattens out the sand and it comes back out and it makes those ripples. He was finding that, but like massive scale in this site that also had a reservoir. Think almost like the Grand Canyon. It wasn't the Grand Canyon, but it was something like that.
Yeah.
And he's thinking that's where it impacted. We don't have evidence of the actual impact because it hit ice. It caused a temperature change and it melted it, causing it all to initially kind of blow up and kind of get, do that ripple effect.
Massive explosion.
And then it just eroded out from there and caused everything.
Wow.
Now, I did want to say, though, I do think, as someone who has my degree in history, I think he over stretches stuff. I think he tries to make correlations and links where it's not always clear. It's one of those correlation isn't causation, and I think he tries to overlink stuff, but I do think comparative mythology is a very interesting topic, but he hits on that very much so. He's basically like, oh, because all these cultures have a flood myth and they all have like a cultural bringer after that, then there must have been a flood. Like, it almost feels like that. I know he has evidence that he's showing throughout the show, but I do also think at the same time there is a reason he's getting criticism from so many anthropologists, archaeologists, historians. It's like maybe you're sort of jumping to a conclusion without having all the evidence. But with that said, I do think it's unfortunate that archaeologists won't investigate the stuff that he's saying. He keeps finding all this stuff, and he's like, I'm like carbon dating this, and it's saying this date. I'm finding this, and this is, astrologically pointing to this date. And they're like, yeah, whatever. Like, no one will even look into it. So I do think it's on both sides. The archaeologists need to actually investigate some of this stuff. But I do think there is room for criticism on his part as well. Healthy criticism.
Okay.
Not just shooting down everything he says.
Another question for you here. How do you feel about Ancient Aliens?
I haven't watched Ancient Aliens.
No, but do you know anything about the theories?
I'm familiar with the fact that they think the pyramids were like landing pads for spaceships and that the pyramids were built by
do you think
by aliens
early human civilization, current human life, do you think there was any input
from aliens?
From an alien source? I think it's entirely possible.
Maybe.
Just the fact that our evolution happened rather very quickly. I think how we turned from a hairy fucking brutish hominid into a hairless fucking human.
It wasn't that quick.
Well, they say it's because we started eating all these crazy things. We had omega-3s. We ate bone marrow.
Yeah.
All these things help our brain develop. But it's like, dude, any other animal could eat that shit too. How come we are so different and skinless and on a different path? How come we have to build?
Something I found when I was reading an anthropology book in college was it was talking about figuring out how brain capacity is changing. If you look at older humans, so if we're thinking like, I don't know, ancient people, I'm not even talking like Neolithic, I'm just talking like, just a couple thousand years old, right? Even just from then to now, there's a different amount of space in the part where like your neck is connecting into your brain, like all those veins are coming in, because you need extra blood flow.
Yeah.
The more you're using your brain, the more blood needs to get to there. And so older humans might be like that big, and like modern humans are now this big. Like it's like almost doubled in size, I think.
We're becoming all brain and nothing else.
A little bit. That is the problem.
We're going to upload our consciousness into a computer chip. So let's move on from Ancient Aliens. Can I bring up another topic?
I do want to say real quick though, because I have had people ask me, as someone who studied history and studies history, like if I think that this or that would be the case, especially with something like the pyramids. Why were the pyramids built in the Americas and like in the Middle East and like Egypt all like around the same time, but like totally separate of each other? Well, if we want to believe ancient apocalypse guy, it's because these, civilization builders came along and probably said, hey, here's how you deal with this. But I don't even give a shit if we want to go off of that theory. Let's just say totally separate of each other, there weren't aliens. I think it's almost disrespectful to assume that humans couldn't have come up with that. Why do you think that Native Americans or indigenous people couldn't have done it, but people over in the Middle East could? I'm not saying like you, but like people in general, right?
No, humans totally built the pyramids. There's
so
a bajillion methods.
I just think
could have did it.
In a sense, you have to think like you started in the Middle East with ziggurats, which were kind of flat, and then they eventually kind of built up. But the mound builders were kind of doing the same thing, just with dirt. Mm-hmm. It's natural to kind of just want to build up. Think like a church. What are you building up towards? The heavens, the sky, the sun, whatever the hell you're worshiping. But also, it's just this central point, and it's really easy to build if you don't have something like steel to be able to build straight up.
Yeah.
So I do think something like that. I'm not saying that there wasn't potential alien influence on human development and civilization.
But what about our DNA?
I don't know. That is an interesting point. But then that almost gets into, are people getting abducted? And I don't know.
But this could have happened a long time ago.
Yeah, not in recent time.
So if it didn't, how do you feel about aliens being sort of like they're watching us at the zoo? Like we're just
I don't think about it.
Dumb animal.
I don't think about it.
It's like in Star Trek when there's an inferior civilization.
Yeah,
that knows nothing about anything.
And they're studying them.
Okay, let's not let them know that we exist, or else they're going to think
Prime Directive. Yeah, all that stuff. So I want to hit on it since we're sort of talking about it. So Atlantis, the theory of Atlantis, comes from Plato. So the first time we ever see it is in the Timaeus, in which Plato basically talks about a advanced civilization that submerged, fell underwater, right? So kind of following along the same lines, that sinking, that water, all that, you know? The one thing is, I feel like as a historian, I have to be like, it's absolutely fucking ridiculous. The first time and only time we hear about it for like 500 fucking years is Plato. And I hate that people are so obsessed with Atlantis, because I'm like, the dude talked about it, and in a sense, it's sort of like Sir Thomas More with Utopia. Imagine if we thought Utopia, well, you know the term Utopia, like a utopian society. Yeah. Utopia was a work. And it was written by a guy, Sir Thomas More, and he basically was just like, this is a perfect society, a utopian society. It's called Utopia. And he literally was like, this is their language, and this is their clothes, and this is their culture. It's a whole book. I read it. It's interesting. But it's literally just like a philosophical work on like what the ideal civilization is. Plato did a similar thing. It's called the Republic. He talks about like the ideal government and system of rule and culture and all that kind of stuff. So the Timaeus, in my mind, feels like maybe it's an extension of that a little bit. Now, granted, there's more to it, but it's a hypothetical conversation. It's him and I think Socrates and like a guy named Timaeus or whoever else is in it. And they're literally just casually having a conversation. And the book actually jumps around a lot. It's not about Atlantis. It's literally about like talking. That's how they did philosophy back then. Yeah. It was conversation and typically hypothetical people, hypothetical situations. And that's just how they wrote philosophy, as if it was a conversation that was happening like you and me. So they talk about Atlantis a little bit, kind of come back to it. Eventually they dive in a little bit. He talks about his father, Plato's father, went to Egypt and supposedly came across records in Egypt that talked about Atlantis or something. But again, it's like we don't have any evidence of any of this.
This is all hearsay.
And then the second time we hear about Atlantis is in another one of his works. So it's like Plato's basically the only dude writing about Atlantis, and then all of a sudden, a couple hundred years later, everyone's like, Atlantis is real. We need to find it. And like, it must be here. Or no, it's there. And it's...
Yeah, okay, I've heard this.
And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not saying that it's not, because then I hate to say it, I have to go to the spiritual side. You know, I do my spiritual hippy dippy, and the spiritual community in the New Age, they believe that Atlantis is real. They believe Atlanteans are here, observing us, kind of like Star Trek, like you're talking about. So it's like, I don't know. Maybe Atlantis is real. Maybe it's not. You know, hard to say.